Courtney. Okay.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So it looks like we have 5 of us and we need 6 for a quorum. Is that right, Courtney?
Yes, we do need 6.
So I think what I'll propose is we could do an abbreviated discussion today. I sent around a document that I can re-forward or share my screen, trying to summarize some of our recommendations or conversations to date, and certainly a draft form. So I wanted to make it very clear that none of these have been formally approved, that we can collect feedback on and potentially have, a small group discussion on any feedback on the document, and I can collect that, and then we can get some more feedback over email from our other committee members that weren't able to make it, because I know we have a lot of our commissioners. Oh, well, John Ring just joined. Hey, John, I know you're bouncing between meetings.
Hello, how's it going?
So that does, we do have a quorum with John. What I still might recommend is to do kind of an abbreviated agenda to walk through our current recommendations. And then with Aaron on the line, I'd love to just tee up a conversation that Aaron and I have had just very informally over email about, again, some strategies to leverage Colorado State Forest Service funding to leverage and support federal funding that's available. So what I might propose is we spend maybe half of our agenda talking about our current recommendations, tee up a conversation about how we could consider using Colorado State Forest Service funding programs to leverage federal dollars, and then wrap up from there, just since we don't have the full group. But I want to see what the rest of you think on what we should do today.
That works for me, Amy. And I just appreciate the time you took to put together like the agenda and compiled all the materials, like the executive order, and you put links and everything. So just thank you. Sounds good.
Yeah, and I think we can table some of that for the next meeting, because I think we'd benefit from the bigger group. But any other thoughts on the proposal for today?
I think that sounds good. I was just looking at the list of members of this group. I think almost everybody's been at like one meeting, but it seems to be the same people showing up. And so if we're having trouble getting quorum, at what point do we agreed on some kind of, you have to participate in so much of the meetings to continue to be part of it. The council at large. We don't need to talk about that now, but I just want to bring that up, maybe for Courtney to flag for something.
Right, and I think we have had good participation in the last couple meetings. I know the commissioners especially have trouble the Tuesday through Thursdays with their meetings. And then I did have a conversation with Paige Lewis, who has opted to take herself off this committee, just given just what you said, Brett, not being able to participate. So I think we'll continue to have those conversations on a one-on-one basis. And then I know there's a couple competing meetings going on today. So, but that's a point well taken, and Courtney can document that and continue to work with Angela and the full council on moving forward.
And I actually would echo what you're saying, Brett, just because, you know, all of these meetings are pretty time consuming. And so if we are tabling stuff until we have more attendance, then, you know, it's kind of duplicating time for all of us that attend. So I guess I would like to see us maybe address that sooner than later, when appropriate.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'll echo Christina. We got people here today, so Amy put a lot of good stuff together. Thanks.
I have been keeping track of attendance, and so I can share that with Amy or with the whole group, maybe with Amy first, and we can see if there's anyone who who maybe we should talk to about the attendance too. So just to let you know, we have been tracking, and we can look at that a little more closely.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. We can follow up on that. I appreciate you tracking everything. Well, why don't is it helpful if I share my screen and I can show the document of our recommendations? You guys seeing the right document? Perfect. I can zoom in a little bit. So I did just think it was a good opportunity. We've had some good discussions over the last 2 to 3 months on opportunities, and we have a pretty heavy hitting list that I think is a good time to revisit and potentially explore, similar to the other committee and some of our polls on really focusing where we might want to spend more of our time to further flesh out these recommendations. And so I bucketed this document into 2 categories to align with the Forest Health Council annual report that's going to the governor that we just talked about last week, of some shared strategies and visions for how resources and funding are directed on the ground, and then strategies to leverage existing funding streams or increase use. So it's a little bit of a higher level bucket of recommendations, and then also keeping space for some smaller recommendations, or maybe not smaller, but more detailed recommendations on specific funding streams and how we could best leverage resources. So the first recommendation I have is a discussion we had during our last meeting of creating a recommendation to the council that staff, and I guess we could consider what we mean by staff, creates a pre-fire playbook to complement the existing post-fire playbook. And what we talked about was, we saw a need for this to identify roles, the organizations, the contexts, and opportunities for technical assistance at the get-go. It would also allow us to bring together all of the various stakeholders that have an interest on the land. So not just those that live or have property nearby, but also, for example, our water utilities that have source watersheds that are outside of their direct service areas. And then ideally would be a good connection between pre-fire stakeholders and post-fire. So those were the main points I have in that recommendation, but want to open it up to the group to get any other thoughts or make sure we accurately articulated that.
I think it
think it
sounds
looks
good and
good.
comprehensive.
The only thing, Amy, I think it's good that you pointed out, in coordination with the Wildfire Ready Watersheds effort. So I don't know if that's something that maybe bring in Chris Sturm on for one of these meetings, just to get his perspective about that. I think that would be a really good tie to have.
That's a great idea. Any other thoughts on the first one?
Yeah, I mean, I really like the third bullet there where you're better connect pre-fire stakeholders with post-fire actors, because I think that gets missed quite a bit. But the other two, the other ones above, I mean, I would hope that we're already doing this to some extent, and maybe this will just formalize it, which would be great. But I would hope that the fire shops are doing this stuff. That's my comment.
Yeah, I think I had a similar question, John, for you and Aaron, since he's on the call, of there's sort of, right, the State Forest Service offices, BLM Forest Service, there's lots of people doing this and other non-agency folks of pre-fire planning. I think what we've talked about is kind of all over the map, which in some ways is good, of people are localizing what they need. But then we've also heard from some other folks like Christy and other places that don't know where to start. So I don't know how it would be received. Aaron and John, do you feel like your people out in the field would benefit from having sort of not a step-by-step checklist, but more like guidelines of these are the right ingredients that we have seen have success. And the ingredients are going to look different depending on your local context, but you should try and have some of these ingredients and thoughts. Is that needed, or do you?
I mean, I guess as that kind of gets to my question, right? So are we
Yeah.
talking about pre-suppression? So we're talking about getting coordinated before the fire happens kind of deal? I mean, once the fire is active and we're actively fighting the fire, I feel like the firefighter capability across the state is pretty well connected. When we have the RMAC, the Rocky Mountain Communication Center, I mean, we're talking to each other all the time. So I feel like, is this like, obviously it says pre-fire, so, but I don't know what coordination other than what we already do you're gonna get, you know what I mean? I don't know. I mean, this is, it has to be maybe a deeper dive than, and maybe this is what this will do. But that's kind of,
I do want to share that I think when we had talked about this before, I'm remembering that like it's even to me who's in the space of like pre-fire forest health every day, it's still not super clear at the state level, like the roles and responsibilities, like Colorado Water Conservation Board, like Department of Natural Resources, State Forest Service, Department of Local Affairs. I feel like they all kind of are in the realm of pre-fire forest health topics. It's just not, it's not super clear, like within the agencies and even the divisions within those agencies, the technical assistance or expertise that they bring, I think at the state level.
I'll just say really quickly for the Colorado State Forest Service, this is not something that we need, but we recognize that there are partners all across the state that are asking those questions. Where do I go for this resource? Should I connect with some of those other agencies or departments that may potentially have funding that's different from the forest specific funding that the Colorado State Forest Service would bring? And where does that health reside? I mean, the hard thing is that you can do a fuels treatment project with grants being provided by the Colorado State Forest Service, and you can do a fuels treatment project to protect your community using wildlife funds, and you can use watershed health funds, and there are so many different ways to get at a similar outcome by slightly adjusting which grants you apply for and which outcomes or objectives for the project that you identify. That a playbook, not for the agencies, but for that small community or that HOA that's kind of wondering where to start, might be beneficial in helping them understand, where to reach out and how to connect to a particular organization or agency that has particular focuses and objectives.
Yeah, I think there's two things. There is, I think, like you said, Aaron, this might be a resource that could help your state forest if they had something to hand out to more people and distribute, right? It could just help facilitate more consistent communication and things like that. But I think I could see two purposes, and we've talked about in past calls, of sort of who to contact and what grants to pursue. Like you said, Aaron, there's a huge range of ways to get this done. But then the second part that we've talked a lot about is how do you coordinate all of those different things that are going on to actually make the cumulative impact you're trying to have? And that's when I think about leveraging resources, I think less about knowing which grant to apply for than how to just get all the right people working in the same direction. And I think that's a much more complicated, it's a different kind of pre-fire playbook, right? And that's where my mind was of like, what are the ingredients of getting everybody working together in the same direction? That's going to look different depending on what part of the state you're working in. But there are some lessons we're learning about sort of how to go about that in different ways. I don't have exactly how that would look in a playbook, right? It's take a little work, but I think there's two things, like who to initially reach out to, but then how to bring it all together. And that's what we've talked about that leads more to that third point of how do you bring it all together of the pre-fire, also talking to the post-fire and sort of vice versa. So that's kind of a big picture thing that I need help making a tangible thing we can work on.
And I also have, just to build on that a little bit, I met yesterday with somebody here in Routt County who's been involved in fire discussions for quite a while, and I personally had no idea that we were as active and involved as we are. But one of the problems that we identified yesterday was there's really no point person like here in Routt County. There's not a go-to person. And I'm wondering if there are any grant monies that will be available to maybe establish a point person in each county, and maybe, another point person regionally, and then maybe even sort of a lead point person. That might be a way that we can start to organize, some of what we're talking about today. And also, one of the things that we talked about yesterday is it seems like here in Routt County, there's some overlap. And so if we can start to streamline some of this stuff, maybe with paid positions, then that might help us to streamline and stop some of the duplicative efforts.
I guess I'd think, Christy, one of the first things in a sort of pre-fire playbook is assess existing groups and actors in that area and engage with them to see if it makes sense to add to existing groups or not, right?
I agree. And that's what I'm trying to do right now, just getting my arms wrapped around what we have going on up here, so that I can better help us here. But I've got to get up to speed. They're far ahead of me.
One of the analogies in the water world is there's a lot of efforts aimed at developing stream management plans to bring together the community to create, a plan to facilitate watershed level improvements. But as part of these plans, folks are doing what's called a capacity scan. So they do the desktop analysis of what needs to be improved on the landscape and then turn towards where there are capacity gaps to move towards implementation. And I wonder if that's similar to what you're saying, Christy and Brett, I don't know if the playbook, it would, be a point in time analysis, but maybe could set the stage for how you would do that capacity scan to figure out where there are gaps in your regional champions to be a facilitator for connecting communities or resources.
I guess I'll just say one other form that this could develop. There's a concept being floated around that we've helped develop at CFRI of sort of the collaborative stages of readiness. There's collaborative groups and there's people wanting to engage in forestry practices, but they're in sort of these different stages we've talked about. Some people are well formed and know where to go. Other people are trying to assess the landscape and kind of everywhere in between. And so I could see a pre-fire playbook helping build on some of those concepts of, right, if you're at this stage, here's how you can help sort of get to a next level, which also then helps the agencies like State Forest Service and BLM Forest and the state assess how to direct different kinds of grant programs, not necessarily more or less, but these people are ready to go cut trees tomorrow. These are the grants. These people need facilitation and coordination help and they're not ready to cut trees. These are the grants to direct there, right? So not necessarily more or less money, but different kinds of money for different people that are ready for different activities.
It
I think
almost,
that, yeah, That's really interesting, Brett. I'm just trying to take notes. But John, is that you? Yeah.
It was me. It almost sounds like we need like a clearinghouse, right? So we need, I don't know, I'm gonna bring the, I don't think I brought this up with this group yet, but something that like Utah does with their WRI, which basically all of the agencies, Forest Service, state wildlife, BLM, and others, they basically, all of their veg projects go through a clearinghouse. So everybody's on first base of who to contact about getting a project on the list, so to speak. So it's kind of, I wouldn't say a nightmare, but it's definitely takes some very high level coordination to pull that off. But for example, the BLM puts like between $8 and $14 million into that agreement every year to do that, basically all of their veg treatments through that clearinghouse. And it's something that may make what we're talking about a lot easier if we had like one entity in charge of, you know, being in contact or getting follow-up from people that want to do stuff. I mean, it seems like it kind of focuses that a little bit. So I don't know, it's something to look at. Called WRI. They have a big website that can show you how many acres they treated, the whole 9 yards. So
Well, this is great. I will compile our feedback in a more useful way and add this to the document that I can send around to the full group. The next topic that we've spent some time in terms of high level leveraging resources and shared visions is the capacity issue. Again, recognizing that housing and salary are among the largest capacity barriers. And some of the conversation from last meeting was aligning with some ideas at the federal level of what are there opportunities for hazard pay, or are there opportunities for creative housing solutions? And I think it was Commissioner Cooper who had brought up the Farm Bill edition of the Forest Service Flexible Partnership Act that allows the Forest Service to potentially lease land for multiple uses such as housing, and looking at that as a useful tool and maybe trying to get feedback from communities as to what are the barriers to use that. So again, this is a concept in early stages that could use a lot of work from this committee to better flesh out, but I wanted to make sure we included it since it's been such a big focus across the Forest Health Council at large. So any other thoughts on just capturing that as a potential recommendation to further explore from this committee?
I don't know anything about that particular act. So the only person I would think to ask is like Jackie Buchanan, who serves on the Forest Health Council. So I don't know if that's something that, reaching out to her to get her thoughts on that. I'm just not familiar with it. That being said, I think the housing solutions is a big deal, and I was really happy to see it captured. I was just on, I think it was a week or two ago, the legislative subcommittee. Christy, you were part of that too, where I think Representative Cutter was on, I think, talking about some of the bills that she's worked on. And I did bring up housing. One of the bills she's backing or sponsoring is basically, to address capacity concerns, workforce concerns, but no mention of anything, housing related. And so she admittedly was like, yeah, until we address the housing issue, that could be a bottleneck. So I know people acknowledge it, but I don't see anything really moving forward in terms of what's been produced by the Wildfire Matters Review Committee. So I think that's something that, I'm happy that it's mentioned, and maybe Jackie has some perspective for that act and how that could move things forward for housing for Forest Service folks.
Yeah, and if we get the chance to ask her about that, I think too, if she can just give us her thoughts on timing. Because, you know, that sounds good, but is it gonna be something that is 3 or 4 years out before we ever even see any approvals to do something to create housing?
I'll just jump in really quickly and say that that solution would take years and years and years for that housing to be developed and to get through a process to be able to build on that land. It is a incredible constraint in many of the communities in the mountains of Colorado for our employees at the Colorado State Forest Service to be able to afford to live in some of these communities. Our strategy has been more on the local level to make sure that people who do fire mitigation and forestry work are included on local lists of people who are eligible for affordable housing. Often these are by county or even by community, but oftentimes they focus on some of those other key representatives from that community, nurses, teachers, policemen, firefighters, and they leave out the people who are doing the fire mitigation work. And so we are really trying as best we can in these local communities to make sure where possible, we provide some voice and input into making sure that foresters that are doing the work in these communities are included in those lists. But it is kind of this one-off, like somebody is reevaluating their list for affordable housing, and you know, our focus has been on doing the work, not necessarily tracking affordable housing initiatives within these local communities. And sometimes we miss those opportunities. But it is a huge constraint to find a forester who's able to work in Durango, Gunnison, Montrose. That report about affordable housing in Colorado that I put in the chat, Steamboat Springs, Granby, Summit County, Woodland Park, are all areas that show pretty high in difficulty associated with average income and housing. And usually our professional foresters are not at that median income base. They're probably working for the state government or federal government a little bit lower than private industry concerns on wage related to the people who are in those communities.
Aaron, I have 2 questions for you. Are the affordable housing eligibility lists at the county level or municipality, or is it a mixture of both? And then does the Colorado State Forest Service have any opportunity for cost of living adjustments in these areas?
We don't have any opportunities for cost of living adjustments within our current structure. But that's certainly something that might be addressed if we had the funding and the ability to do that. Who creates those lists is really centered upon who is responsible for the affordable housing in the community. If it is a city effort, then sometimes the city creates those lists. If it is a county effort or a regional effort, those lists are created through some other process or source. So there's not a consistent one-stop shop to get that in place, but the need is throughout. I mean, anything west of I-25, right, is a pretty difficult housing market with just a couple of exceptions. And if you haven't seen the growth in like Alamosa or Del Norte, those few exceptions are disappearing quickly.
I guess I'm glad that this is sort of recognized as a constraint and sort of how we want to think about leveraging resources. I might encourage us, I just don't know how much of if focusing on housing is where our energy is best spent, but I think the other thing you said, housing and salary, I think maybe advocating for salary specifically for the state agencies and people we don't have as much control with the federal agencies but state and local. And things like cost of living adjustments, right? That's something, a recommendation from the Forest Health Council might make a difference to offset some of the housing costs, rather than looking at building actual structures and houses. So,
Yeah, I agree, Brett. I think that's really good perspective. Yeah, thank you.
A related recommendation that we've discussed is also recognizing that there's an administrative capacity need of also your non-fire, fire-based professionals in tracking projects, in funding and grant writing, reporting, coordinating with collaboratives. And we haven't discussed at length recommendations in alignment with that capacity barrier beyond potentially identifying in the spreadsheet of funding opportunities which funding programs allow for capacity building, but wanted to make sure we captured sort of the other side of the coin, that we need sort of this administrative support, these connective tissue positions that make these projects happen. But any other thoughts on that one? It's a little bit of a just placeholder to make sure we don't lose sight of that.
I guess I'll just say I wasn't part of the legislative committee, but there was a recommendation somewhere in there of something to the effect of supporting forest collaboratives or collaboration, which I think was hinting at some of these same needs, which did not make it anywhere near the top. It was the very lowest ranked recommendation with that committee, even before it came to a vote of the full council. So I think it's been recognized, and I don't know why it was not, how the conversations went of why it didn't garner more attention there, but I think it is definitely a big need that I've still heard is needed, right? That I think we should carry forward.
And I can weigh in a little bit on that. This is my perspective, but I think part of the reason that that got put to the bottom of the list is because we felt like we really don't need any more planning. And so maybe if we were more specific, like I like the way that you stated this, Amy, you know, kind of this need for some of this connective tissue, which is what I was talking about earlier, where, you know, maybe we've got some more indifferent point people that are paid. And I think if we were more specific about those needs, then it might have ranked a little bit higher. But for a few of us on that other committee, we just felt like, you know, we wanted to see more action-oriented items instead of planning type items. I might not have captured that exactly correctly, but that's my perspective on those meetings.
Cool. Thanks, Christy, for that. I think things like John Ring just brought up of the centralized sort of coordination of things. Like that is connective tissue to help move these things forward in a more strategic way. I don't know exactly where that $8 to $12 million that you were talking about went to all to build the website, or if that was to treatments, or how that works, right? But that's a significant investment in connective tissue for Utah.
Yeah, no, it's all resource programs. So you'd have fuels, wildlife, forestry, range, any veg treatments went through that clearinghouse. And I would ask you just go look at the website. I can just type in Utah WRI and it'll come up and it'll show you everything.
But that kind of funding doesn't go to any on the ground treatments. It goes to the coordination and the clearinghouse and all that goes on behind to set that up and make that happen, right?
Both. So it goes, I mean, they get, you know, in our agreement with, so it's all through the state. So the state would get some money to manage it, right? For their folks to manage it, but the majority of that money goes to on the ground treatments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Seemed like an awful lot to put a website up, but not that it's a simple task to coordinate all that. That's, yeah, it helps.
And then a closely aligned recommendation that we've discussed throughout our meetings is how do we best support the Colorado Wildfire Mitigation Funding Compilation that Courtney has given us a lot of updates and been really gracious at taking some of our early feedback on that spreadsheet. And then also the Colorado State Forest Service Natural Resources Grants Database. How do we provide feedback on making those tools really useful, but also keep in mind that this is to complement outreach efforts to drive communities to their collaboratives and Colorado State Forest Service field offices to really, encapsulate the feedback loop that we talked about again with the pre-fire playbook of making sure that we don't spend all of our resources on developing a really nice spreadsheet that nobody accesses or doesn't drive people to people who can help them wade through all of the various funding sources. And I think I guess my thought on this strategy is it's a little bit interwoven in a lot of our other conversations. So I don't know if it's how much it needs discussion on its own beyond that. It could be a pillar in how we think through all of our other recommendations of how do we develop these tools in a useful way and create this feedback loop that makes sense. Any other thoughts there?
I have a question. We're talking about maybe, like a clearinghouse and also just some point people. Is the Colorado State Forest Service, would that be a role that they could play, with some additional funding?
I think potentially. The difficulty is that information changes on a really regular basis, and so much of that funding relates to programs like wildlife and watershed stuff that may be focused in areas that are outside of where we are normally operating in, which is forestry and fire mitigation, forest health stuff. Because there are so many opportunities for different funding sources, it's really hard to have one agency combine all of those and to keep it up to date. I know that we're kind of in conversations about what that might look like and how to do a better job with what we have. But it is inherently a time-consuming and difficult process because that doesn't even get to some of the private grant funding opportunities that are out there from like the Walton Foundation or some of the other large nonprofits that offer some of these type of grants. So it's a challenge for us, but I guess at least I don't know. My crystal ball right now says that we're moving away from a time where funding and money was a constraining entity in our ability to get stuff done towards an area where things like forester capacity, industry capacity, contractors to do the work, as the investments are coming through with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA Act and the investment from the Colorado legislature in both the DNR and the Colorado State Forest Service. I'm not sure that funding is will be the constraining factor very much longer. It'll be those other resources that are needed to get the jobs done on the ground inside of these communities. And I worry that in itself will cause a supply and demand loop of increasing treatment costs that will make it difficult in the short term to get good work done. And combined with rising interest rates, it's not a very attractive private industry market to take out a bunch of loans on forestry equipment and try to branch out to take advantage of all of this work. So there's kind of a combination of stuff going on. We do have that small grant fund for industry that Tim Reeder operates, but that's really small scale stuff and only has enough funding to help, 3 or 4 people each year. But there are some of those opportunities. I don't know. We can do better with combining all of the opportunities together for sure. But like I said, I think that the major constraint in the next couple of years, as all of this funding hit, might not be the actual dollars or grant funding, but will be the contractors and the professionals to lay out these projects in a way that, like Brett talked about, is consistent and coordinated and effective. We can have anybody lay out a project, but it might not get the actual outcomes that were possible if you had a professional forester, write the prescription, do the work, do some goal programming through programs like FBS and the fire fuels module to make sure we were actually decreasing the fire effect a substantial amount for that large per acre price bill that we were paying.
Yeah, thanks for that, Aaron. I think I agree that there's a lot of funding coming down the pipeline. It is about helping connect the right people or connecting people with that funding. But I do think you're right there's a couple things we're not going to be able to ramp up mechanical treatments fast enough before changes in our forest through either fires or insects and disease or other things change them faster. And so I think that's where, back to the top of this sort of pre-fire playbook and linking a pre-fire playbook with a post-fire playbook, and even a during fire, right? The pre, during, and post, and just sort of what is our strategy on the landscape? Where can we use wildfire as a treatment tool, right? That during fire, where can we not? How do we link all three of these is what we're going to need to do, because depending on timber industry to solve this problem alone is, I think, a failed sort of solution. They're part of the solution, but we have to think about all of those different avenues to work together to make actual effective progress. So, and I call out, John Ring and the BLM. There was a fire in Western Colorado by Grand Junction that was managed for resource benefit a couple weeks ago. And I was like, very publicly, letters out there, like, we're doing this for this reason. And I haven't seen that in a long time. So that was great.
Great point, Brett. Just to round out this document, I captured just a few of our topics for additional discussion that came up at our last meeting, of diving in a little bit more into President Biden's EO from April on strengthening the nation's forest communities and local economies. We've had some discussion about the Colorado Forest Atlas and thinking through a better understanding the data layers or opportunities for a stakeholder-driven process to develop those and better understand how it's considered in funding programs. And then it's come up a few times at our Forest Health Council and this committee of keeping an eye on the prescribed fire program review. And I think all of those reports are out now. I almost wonder if these are 3 good topics that the Forest Health Council as a whole should discuss. But I'd be open to feedback from our group here, and then Courtney on that as well, whether we just kind of shift those for you and Angela to consider as we think about discussions and priorities for the council as a whole.
Yeah, I know on the prescribed fire program review that was brought up in the legislative subcommittee as well as, a topic of interest. So I think given that, I do think, absolutely the whole Forest Health Council would be interested in that. I think the other 2 as well would be good. I honestly don't know, Amy, or Courtney, when we're thinking about like the agendas for the full full council meetings, like how we provide input on items. I don't know how that process works.
I am not exactly sure how the process of providing input, like from the committees to Angela to build the agenda works, but I know that she wants the agendas to be filled with topics that are important to the council. And so, you know, if this committee decides these are important things to bring up, I'm sure she would want to put those in. So I can definitely flag these for Angela, and we can try to incorporate these into the next meeting. Or, I mean, these are a lot, so maybe like one at a time for a while if we want to pull out maybe what's most timely, like maybe prioritize these 3 topics for like additional discussion to see what we can fit into the next council meeting.
Okay. And then one other thought, thank you, Courtney, that's helpful. One other thought too, I think building on Brett's idea about thinking about that pre-fire playbook and how that could be used as like kind of our stance or our strategy on the landscape. I think that's really intriguing. And I also know I've seen, I don't know if it was on the upcoming agenda for the Forest Health Council meeting on October 20th, maybe it was in the annual report, but one of the council's tasks is to come up with, I think, a 30-year strategy or vision. And so just want to bring that up, that I don't know if you know, the pre-fire playbook, this concept would also kind of hash itself out in whenever we talk through like this 30-year vision. So just want to flag that. I'm not saying we have to discuss that, but it's just a thought in my mind that at some point we're going to have to think about the 30-year vision, and a part of that is the strategy on the landscape.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Oh, I can just say one quick thing about the 30-year plan. I remember in one of the first Forest Health Council meetings, all the members took a poll about which actions of the council seemed most urgent, and I know that one fell back a little bit. And so, I think it was leveraging resources and sort of like legislative action that were called to the top, and that's why the committees were made. So I can try to find out maybe what the plan is for the 30-year vision. Maybe that's like a 2023 thing, or maybe it's 2024 thing, and perhaps there'll be a reprioritization. So I can do a little digging to see if the council will reprioritize all of these legislative actions, or if it's already sort of been parsed out.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. My recollection was we want to dive into like getting recommendations to legislature and do stuff in the first year, and not start on a 30-year vision, at least in the first year, but consider it in year 2 or 3 or something. So I read the latest emails. I think back to the 3 things on the bottom, Amy, that you had suggested. I wonder if this is the Colorado Forest Atlas, if that's an offline conversation about what the capacities are of that and potential to increase that to be something of this clearinghouse of sort of vegetation management in Colorado. Or if that is something that we want to bring to this committee. And I think some of you are aware, we've been working with the State Forest Service and others to collect all of the sort of forestry vegetation management treatments across the state, across all lands. But it's not a comprehensive database. It's not required that everybody go through and submit information. So it's nothing like Utah, and it has a different kind of value then as more informational thing, but it's not up on a live website for people to zoom in and see, because it's not anywhere near complete enough to make that the purpose. But yeah, I don't know where this goes of this. And then I think it's a bigger conversation of like, there's not a clear shared stewardship strategy in Colorado. Whereas in Utah or New Mexico or some of our neighboring states, they view shared stewardship as this vehicle to build these flooding houses and sort of pre-fire playbook, if you will.
Aaron, you have your hand up? Do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, if you're not familiar, Utah has a unique special set of laws that put the responsibility for fire suppression on local communities rather than on the state. And so for the state to come in and help a local community handle or deal with a multi-million-dollar large fire, the state puts a requirement on those local communities that they have to spend at least 10% of the cost associated with their 10-year average fire suppression responsibility every year on fuels mitigation projects to receive state funding in the case of a catastrophic wildfire in their community. Communities that have very low risk of wildland fire, they can gamble or take out their own insurance. But what that does is it forces little communities and large communities all across the state of Utah to spend significant taxpayer resources from their community on those projects and to track them spatially and to submit those to the state. And then with the assistance of the BLM and the Forest Service, you add in all the federal treatments into that database and you get something like that WRI that Utah has available to it. The laws in Colorado are much different, making that possibility much more complicated to incentivize or even force local municipalities to spend that money to protect their own communities using wildfire suppression costs as a potential leverage. Although the Forest Atlas could potentially be something similar to what that is, there is no demand, there's no like requirement for all of that data or all of the treatment to be spatially compiled and submitted to the state from all of these local municipalities. And as Brett and CFRI are working very hard to try and capture all of the treatment, the ones that I think probably are the most difficult ones to capture are the ones being done on a really local level, on a fire district level or on a community level, because it would take going to each one of those communities and asking if they have information to submit. And I think that's some of the data that's often missed and also not incentivized. So it's just different. Utah's different because of their laws associated with who pays for fire suppression being different than Colorado's.
Yeah, I think that's great context. I'm not aware of all of, I'd love to talk to you more about that, Aaron, because that's interesting, but I think it just highlights if we're a committee on leveraging resources, that's the first thing that I think of we should work on is how do we incentivize people to do more work on the ground and leverage resources better. And I know that we can't replicate what Utah did because of a whole variety of how things are set up, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't see what we have and how we can try. You know, the DNR, and we're advising the state legislature and the governor, so change happens.
Great points, Brett. And yeah, good context, Aaron. I didn't know that either. Well, to just wrap up in our last few minutes, this has been really helpful feedback just to flush out where we've been. And I'm curious to hear from this group on, we've had a lot of discussion on the pre-fire playbook idea. We could, continue to emphasize or prioritize fleshing that out, or we could do something similar to the legislative committee and send out a poll to rank some of our priorities, because I think we could benefit from getting some outside speakers for a few of these recommendations or further flesh them out with the committee. So I'd love to hear any feedback on if we feel prepared to rank these just to help us internally prioritize, or if we want to, wait and have that discussion next month.
So Amy, when you say rank these, do you mean these last three that we're talking about, or rank what we just overall think is important as a committee?
Yeah, sorry, Christy, good clarification. I'm ranking the strategies that we have above these last three. I think for those last three topics, Courtney, if you could bring those to Angela just to consider for the agendas for the Forest Health Council. And it does seem like the prescribed fire program review is something that's come up at both committees and the Forest Health Council. So might make sense to consider, but these three might be better to just forward on for the full council discussions. And then in terms of ranking, it would be these more specific strategies that we walked through above in the above document. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you. And so, yeah, I'm a fan of sending out an email and we can rank this and then we focus our, efforts on one or two important things for the near future. I'm fine with that.
I guess especially hearing how the legislative committee worked, I might suggest we try and we mentioned Chris Sturm. I feel like we need a little work to define what a pre-fire playbook, what role it would fill, what it would look like before we send it out and people are just like, now we're, don't know what it is or what we're doing. So I might push for a little bit more refinement of the ideas and exploration of where the need is and what we can do before we send out emails and vote.
I agree. I wouldn't be ready to prioritize anything at this point.
I think that's good feedback. And if our small group is supportive, I'm happy to invite Chris to our next meeting just to kick off and give us an update on the wildfire ready watersheds. And I can follow up with him on just our basic idea to get his thoughts and feedback. And then we can spend a little bit more time fleshing out this idea and pull together some feedback from those that weren't able to attend this meeting on the document that I sent out, and I'll send out a red line version just to capture some of our additional feedback today. Awesome. We did not accept the meeting minutes from September. I know we're right at time, but if folks are willing to stay on, we could entertain a motion to go ahead and accept September's meeting minutes with our quorum of 6.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 All right, well, that passes unanimously, and we'll note that in our meeting minutes. Thanks, Courtney, for being on to document, and thanks for the great feedback today. And our next meeting is November 7th, a Monday. I don't think there's any holiday there, so hopefully we'll have our full participation and can jump back into this. So thank you all for joining today and really good feedback and discussion. Any other final thoughts before we jump off?
I think so.
All right. Well, good to see everyone. Have a good week.